Nicolae Ceaușescu was born on January 26, 1918, in the small village of Scornicesti, in southern Romania. He grew up in a poor rural family, the third of 10 children. His parents were peasants, and their livelihood depended on farming, which was typical for the region at the time. Life in Scornicesti was harsh, and young Nicolae experienced poverty and hardship from an early age. His father, Nicolae Ceaușescu, was reportedly authoritarian and strict, while his mother, Alexandrina, was religious and took care of the household. The tough rural environment and the family's meager means had a profound impact on Nicolae's early outlook on life. He had limited access to formal education and only attended elementary school, which was common among peasants in that period. At the age of 11, Ceaușescu left his village and moved to Bucharest to escape the harsh rural life. He began working as an apprentice shoemaker under the mentorship of Alexandru Sandulescu, a shoemaker with leftist political views. This period marked the beginning of his political awakening, as he became involved with communist groups in the 1930s. His early exposure to poverty, alongside his budding political activity, shaped his radical views and would later influence his authoritarian leadership style. Between 1935 and 1945, Nicolae Ceaușescu underwent a transformative period in his life, both personally and politically. These years marked his deep involvement in communist activities, imprisonment, and his rise within the Romanian Communist Party. By 1935, at the age of 17, Ceaușescu had become an active member of the Romanian Communist Party, RCP, which was illegal at the time due to its opposition to the monarchy and the country's alignment with fascist and nationalist ideologies. He participated in protests, strikes, and the distribution of anti-fascist literature, often putting himself at risk of arrest. His mentor, Gheorghe Dej, played a significant role in shaping Ceaușescu's political development. In 1936, Ceaușescu was arrested for the first time for his communist activities, and over the next few years, he was repeatedly imprisoned for his involvement in illegal political actions. His growing reputation as a committed communist activist earned him a prominent place within the RCP. During World War II, Romania was under the control of a fascist government aligned with Nazi Germany. The Communist Party, still underground, was focused on resisting the fascist regime and its alliance with the Axis powers. Ceaușescu was arrested again in 1939 and spent much of the early 1940s in prison, particularly in the Doftana and Târgu Jiu prisons. While in prison, Ceaușescu continued his political education and established strong relationships with other key communist leaders, including Gheorghe Dej, who would later become the head of the post-war Communist Party and Romania's first communist leader. Prison became a training ground for future communist leaders, and Ceaușescu was noted for his loyalty, discipline, and ideological commitment. In 1944, Romania switched sides in the war, joining the Allies after a coup led by King Michael I, which overthrew the pro-Nazi regime of Ion Antonescu. With the Soviet Union's advance into Eastern Europe and the growing influence of the Communist Party, Ceaușescu was released from prison in 1944. His close connections with the party's leadership, particularly Gheorghe Dej, helped him quickly rise through the ranks. After the war, as Romania came under Soviet influence, Ceaușescu held several important roles within the newly empowered Romanian Communist Party. He served as the head of the Union of Communist Youth and became a close aide to Gheorghe Dej, marking the beginning of his long ascent to power. In this decade, Ceaușescu laid the foundations for his future role as Romania's leader, shaped by the harsh experiences of prison, his loyalty to the communist cause, and his rising influence within the party. His hardline beliefs and ambition would drive his later political career and authoritarian rule. Nicolae Ceaușescu's political career advanced significantly as Romania transitioned into a communist state under Soviet influence. After World War II, with the backing of the Soviet Union, the Romanian Communist Party, RCP, began consolidating its power. Ceaușescu, having gained favor with senior party members like Gheorghe Dej during his time in prison, found himself in a position to rise quickly within the party hierarchy. In the immediate post-war years, Ceaușescu was tasked with important responsibilities in the newly forming government. He was appointed Deputy Minister of Agriculture in 1948, at a time when the communist regime was carrying out widespread land reforms, including the forced collectivization of agriculture. These policies were often met with resistance from peasants, but Ceaușescu played a key role in enforcing the party line, earning a reputation for being a strict and loyal operator. His ability to carry out these directives without hesitation contributed to his growing prominence. During this period, Ceaușescu also became more involved in the military. In 1947, he was appointed as a major general in the Romanian People's Army, despite having no formal military background. His rapid promotion in the military was part of a broader strategy by the RCP to place trusted party members in key positions of power. His involvement in both the army and the government allowed Ceaușescu to build important connections and expand his influence. By the early 1950s, Ceaușescu had become a member of the Central Committee of the Romanian Communist Party, solidifying his status as one of the party's rising stars. He continued to work closely with Gheorghe Dej, who had become Romania's de facto leader after 1947, following the abdication of King Michael and the establishment of the Romanian People's Republic. Ceaușescu's loyalty to Gheorghe Dej was unwavering, and this relationship became a key factor in his steady political advancement. The early 1950s were marked by political purges within the RCP as Gheorghe Dej sought to eliminate rivals and consolidate his control over the party. Ceaușescu supported these purges, demonstrating his commitment to the regime and his willingness to sideline or eliminate those who were perceived as threats to party unity. His involvement in these internal power struggles further ingratiated him with the leadership and positioned him as a trusted ally of the party's top echelon. Throughout these years, Ceaușescu also strengthened his ideological education. He traveled to the Soviet Union and other communist countries where he studied their systems of governance and internal security measures. These experiences deepened his understanding of authoritarian rule and shaped his future leadership style, which would be marked by strict control over all aspects of Romanian society. By 1955, Ceaușescu had firmly established himself as one of the most influential figures within the Romanian Communist Party. His loyalty, organizational skills, and willingness to enforce the party's directives, no matter how harsh, positioned him as a key player in Romania's political landscape. This period laid the groundwork for his eventual rise to the top of the Romanian state, where he would exert absolute control for more than 2 decades. Nicolae Ceaușescu continued to climb the ranks within the Romanian Communist Party, positioning himself for the eventual leadership of the country. This decade was critical in shaping his future policies and consolidating his political power. After the death of Stalin in 1953 and the gradual thawing of Soviet politics under Nikita Khrushchev, Romania, like other Eastern Bloc countries, experienced internal shifts. Gheorghe Dej, Ceaușescu's mentor and the dominant figure in Romanian politics, sought to navigate these changes by balancing Romania's dependence on the Soviet Union with a push for more national autonomy. Ceaușescu was deeply involved in this process, having gained enough trust from Gheorghe Dej to be included in high-level political discussions. In 1955, Ceaușescu became a full member of the Politburo, the most powerful decision-making body in the Romanian Communist Party. This position marked a significant leap in his political career. He played a crucial role in the party's leadership, often acting as Gheorghe Dej's enforcer and trusted aide. As a member of the Politburo, Ceaușescu was involved in key policies related to Romania's industrialization, agricultural collectivization, and internal security. During this period, Romania was undergoing rapid industrialization, with heavy industry being prioritized over consumer goods or agriculture. Ceaușescu was an advocate of these policies, believing that they would modernize Romania and reduce its economic dependence on the Soviet Union. While the policies achieved some success in boosting Romania's industrial output, they also created widespread social discontent due to the harsh living conditions they imposed on the population. Ceaușescu's experience with managing these policies would influence his own economic strategies when he came to power. Ceaușescu also became deeply involved in the state security apparatus. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, the Securitate, Romania's secret police, was used to suppress dissent and eliminate political opposition. Ceaușescu supported the use of these repressive measures and worked closely with Gheorghe Dej to ensure that the party's grip on power remained unchallenged. His close involvement with the Securitate not only demonstrated his commitment to the authoritarian aspects of the regime, but also helped him establish a network of loyal supporters within the security forces. In 1961, Ceaușescu became deputy prime minister, further consolidating his influence. By this time, Gheorghe Dej's health was declining, and Ceaușescu began positioning himself as his natural successor. He maintained his loyalty to Gheorghe Dej while simultaneously building alliances within the party that would support his bid for leadership. Ceaușescu's ability to maneuver within the party, combined with his deep involvement in both domestic and foreign policy, made him the most likely candidate to succeed Gheorghe Dej. Gheorghe Dej died in March 1965, and Ceaușescu quickly moved to secure his position. In a smooth transition of power, Ceaușescu was chosen as first secretary of the Romanian Communist Party, the highest position in the country. His ascension marked the beginning of his rule, which would last for more than 2 decades. By 1965, Ceaușescu had successfully navigated the complex political environment of post-Stalinist Eastern Europe, securing his leadership of Romania. His rise to power was marked by his loyalty to Gheorghe Dej, his skill in managing party politics, and his ability to maintain control over Romania's security forces. These experiences would shape his leadership style, which would become increasingly autocratic in the years to come. Nicolae Ceaușescu's leadership in Romania was characterized by initial popularity and the consolidation of power, as well as growing autocracy and nationalism. After Gheorghe Dej's death in 1965, Ceaușescu became first secretary of the Romanian Communist Party, and later, in 1967, chairman of the State Council, effectively making him the head of state. His early years in power were marked by a series of reforms that initially gained him support both domestically and internationally. One of Ceaușescu's early significant actions was to distance Romania from Soviet control. In contrast to other Eastern Bloc countries, Romania under Ceaușescu pursued a more independent foreign policy. In 1968, he famously condemned the Soviet-led invasion of Czechoslovakia, which aimed to crush the Prague Spring reform movement. This bold move, which defied the Warsaw Pact consensus, boosted Ceaușescu's reputation in the West and among Romanians, who saw him as a defender of national sovereignty. Western countries, including the United States, Britain, and France, viewed him as a more moderate communist leader and sought to improve relations with Romania. This led to trade agreements and a degree of diplomatic recognition that was unusual for a Soviet-aligned country at the time. Domestically, Ceaușescu promoted a policy of industrialization and economic development. His government focused on expanding heavy industry and infrastructure, which was seen as key to modernizing Romania. Major projects were launched in energy production, chemical industries, and manufacturing. Ceaușescu also promoted agricultural collectivization, although this was less successful and caused widespread dissatisfaction among peasants. Despite the problems with agriculture, the economic policies initially gave the appearance of growth and progress, and Romania experienced some modernization in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Ceaușescu also sought to promote a distinct national identity rooted in Romanian history and culture. This was part of his broader policy of distancing the country from Soviet cultural and political influence. He initiated a program of national communism, which emphasized Romania's independence from Moscow and celebrated Romanian historical figures such as Vlad the Impaler and the ancient Dacians. This nationalist approach resonated with many Romanians who had long chafed under Soviet domination. However, it also marked the beginning of Ceaușescu's personality cult, as he increasingly portrayed himself as the embodiment of Romania's strength and independence. By the early 1970s, Ceaușescu began to tighten his grip on power. His regime grew increasingly authoritarian, as he centralized decision-making and relied more heavily on the Securitate, Romania's secret police, to maintain control. Political dissent was not tolerated, and the regime suppressed any opposition with harsh measures. Ceaușescu also started to involve his family members in the government, most notably his wife, Elena Ceaușescu, who gradually took on an influential role in both political and scientific circles, despite her lack of qualifications. This nepotism would later contribute to the regime's growing unpopularity. Internationally, Ceaușescu maintained his independent stance, which helped Romania avoid direct Soviet intervention and allowed the country to act as a mediator in various global conflicts. He positioned Romania as a neutral player in the Cold War, seeking to establish diplomatic relations with countries from both the Western and non-aligned worlds. Ceaușescu's government became involved in peace efforts and diplomatic missions in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, which earned Romania a degree of international prestige. However, by the mid-1970s, cracks in Ceaușescu's policies began to emerge. The economic growth of the late 1960s slowed, and the focus on heavy industry led to inefficiencies and poor living standards for ordinary Romanians. The increasing centralization of power, combined with the growing personality cult around Ceaușescu, foreshadowed the more repressive and economically disastrous period that would follow in the late 1970s and 1980s. Nonetheless, during this decade, Ceaușescu remained a relatively popular leader, admired for his independent stance and his efforts to promote Romania's sovereignty. Nicolae Ceaușescu's regime in Romania became increasingly autocratic and economically disastrous as his policies shifted from initial popularity to oppressive rule and national hardship. By this time, Ceaușescu had fully consolidated power, with his cult of personality reaching extreme levels, and his wife, Elena, gaining unprecedented influence in both politics and science. The centralization of power within the Ceaușescu family led to increasing inefficiency and corruption within the government. Ceaușescu's economic policies during this period focused heavily on industrialization and massive development projects, many of which were poorly planned and executed. One of his most ambitious but ultimately destructive plans was the aim to pay off Romania's foreign debt, which had ballooned due to the loans Ceaușescu took from Western countries in the previous decade. To achieve this, Ceaușescu imposed severe austerity measures that crippled the standard of living for ordinary Romanians. Food, electricity, and heating were rationed, and exports of agricultural and industrial products were prioritized over domestic needs, leading to widespread shortages. While Ceaușescu succeeded in paying off the foreign debt by 1989, it came at the cost of immense suffering for the population. During this period, Ceaușescu also continued with grandiose infrastructure projects, including the construction of the People's House, Palace of the Parliament, in Bucharest, one of the largest buildings in the world. This project, along with others like the systematization program that sought to urbanize rural areas, displaced thousands of people and drained the country's already limited resources. Despite the economic hardships, Ceaușescu's regime continued to promote the image of Romania as a modern, self-sufficient state, while reality painted a very different picture for the people. Politically, Ceaușescu's rule became increasingly repressive. The Securitate, Romania's secret police, expanded its surveillance and control over the population, creating a climate of fear and mistrust. Dissent was crushed, and any criticism of the regime was met with harsh punishment, including imprisonment or forced labor. Ceaușescu's growing paranoia led him to isolate himself from even his closest advisors, relying instead on a small circle of loyalists, including his wife Elena. Political purges and the imprisonment of perceived enemies became more common as Ceaușescu sought to maintain absolute control. Internationally, Ceaușescu's independent foreign policy, which had once earned him admiration, began to falter. Romania's neutrality in the Cold War and its attempts to mediate between the West and the Eastern Bloc no longer held the same appeal. While Ceaușescu continued to maintain diplomatic relations with both sides, the worsening domestic situation and reports of human rights abuses began to tarnish his reputation abroad. Although he still managed to visit Western countries and host foreign dignitaries, the international community became increasingly critical of his regime. By the early 1980s, Romania was experiencing severe economic decline. The country's infrastructure, including factories and energy systems, was crumbling due to poor maintenance and mismanagement. Meanwhile, Ceaușescu's insistence on maintaining a high level of exports to meet his debt repayment goals left the population facing constant shortages of basic goods. Romanians endured harsh winters without heat, food lines became a daily reality, and medical care deteriorated as resources were diverted to industrial and export sectors. Despite the deteriorating conditions, Ceaușescu remained firmly in power, largely due to the oppressive control of the Securitate and his ability to stifle dissent. The personality cult surrounding him and Elena reached new heights, with both being glorified in state media and in public life. Ceaușescu was portrayed as a visionary leader, while Elena was increasingly given titles and honors, despite her lack of expertise in most fields she oversaw. The regime's propaganda machine worked relentlessly to maintain the illusion of prosperity and progress, even as Romania spiraled deeper into economic and social crisis. By 1985, Ceaușescu's regime was characterized by widespread suffering, repression, and a growing sense of isolation both domestically and internationally. The seeds of discontent that had been sown during this period would eventually contribute to his downfall in the late 1980s, as the Romanian people became increasingly disillusioned with his rule and the brutal conditions they endured. Nicolae Ceaușescu's regime in Romania entered its final and most tumultuous phase, characterized by severe economic hardship, increased repression, and growing public discontent. By this time, Ceaușescu had become deeply isolated from both the Romanian people and the international community, as his policies became more erratic and his personality cult intensified. The austerity measures imposed by Ceaușescu during the early 1980s to repay Romania's foreign debt continued into this period, leading to widespread suffering. Basic goods such as food, fuel, and electricity were severely rationed. Daily life became a struggle for most Romanians, as long lines formed for bread, meat, and other essentials. Heating and electricity were often cut off, especially during the harsh winters, while hospitals and schools faced critical shortages of supplies. The population endured these deprivations largely in silence due to the fear of retaliation by the Securitate, the country's secret police, which kept a close watch on any form of dissent. Despite the worsening situation, Ceaușescu remained determined to maintain his ambitious development projects and pay off Romania's debt, which he achieved by 1989. However, this accomplishment came at an immense human cost. While the debt repayment was heralded as a great victory by Ceaușescu's regime, it did little to alleviate the growing economic disaster facing the country. Infrastructure continued to decay, and Romania's economy remained stagnant, with inflation and unemployment rising sharply. Ceaușescu's foreign policy also became increasingly problematic during this period. His independent stance within the Eastern Bloc, once admired, had become a liability. As other communist regimes in Eastern Europe began to reform or collapse under the pressure of Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika, Ceaușescu remained rigidly opposed to any form of liberalization or reform. He condemned the Soviet Union's moves toward greater openness, instead doubling down on his authoritarian policies. This further isolated Romania both from the West and from its former communist allies, leaving the country in a state of diplomatic isolation. Domestically, Ceaușescu continued to tighten his grip on power. His wife, Elena Ceaușescu, held significant influence over the government, and both were surrounded by a small circle of loyalists. The Ceaușescu personality cult grew to absurd levels, with the media portraying Nicolae and Elena as infallible leaders guiding Romania toward a golden future, even as the country sank deeper into crisis. Their portraits were omnipresent in public spaces, and their birthdays and anniversaries were celebrated with lavish state-sponsored events. By 1989, public frustration and resentment had reached a breaking point. While Romanians had endured years of deprivation and repression, the revolutionary changes sweeping across Eastern Europe emboldened many. In December 1989, anti-government protests erupted in the city of Timișoara, sparked by the regime's attempt to forcibly relocate a dissident pastor, Laszlo Tokes. The protest quickly spread as thousands of people took to the streets, demanding an end to Ceaușescu's rule. The regime responded with brutal force, sending in the military and securitate forces to crush the demonstrations, resulting in numerous deaths. Despite the repression in Timișoara, protests continued to grow. On December 21, 1989, Ceaușescu attempted to give a speech in Bucharest to a large crowd, expecting to rally support, as he had in the past. However, this time the crowd turned against him, booing and jeering. Ceaușescu, visibly shocked and confused, was unable to regain control of the situation. This marked a decisive moment in the collapse of his regime. As the protest escalated, the Romanian military began to side with the demonstrators, and on December 22nd, Ceaușescu and his wife fled Bucharest by helicopter. They were soon captured by the military, and after a brief and hastily conducted trial on charges of genocide, corruption, and other crimes, both Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were sentenced to death. On December 25, 1989, they were executed by firing squad, bringing an end to over 2 decades of Ceaușescu's rule.